o professor João Machatini, que é diretor de programas na Agência do Desenvolvimento Integrado do Norte. Ele está aqui mesmo conosco no estúdio. Vamos ter a diretora regional da Oxfam, que nos fala a partir da Zâmbia. Vamos ter a professora Liazati Bonatti, que nos fala a partir de Trinidade e Tobago. A professora Liazati Bonatti é uma especialista em terrorismo, é uma especialista em extremismo violento e tem muitos trabalhos feitos sobre a situação em Moçambique e no norte de Cabo Delgado em particular. Vamos ter a Marta Licuco, que é uma ativista de direitos humanos e que trabalhou muito empenhadamente no apoio aos deslocados internos que saíam das zonas afetadas pelo conflito e chegavam a Pemba e contavam muito com o apoio dela. Vamos ter também, ela vai nos falar a partir de Pemba, vamos ter uma primeira intervenção de fora também, a ser feita por Dr. Alan Bryden. Alan Bryden é do Geneva Center for Security Site Governance, DICAF, que é nosso parceiro importante na implementação do programa de princípios voluntários sobre segurança e direitos humanos. Vamos ter a intervenção do emeritus professor Mohamed Sali. Emeritus professor Mohamed Sali é o professor já reformou no Instituto de Estudos Sociais de Haia, que é parte do Erasmus Rotterdam University. Ele que tem mais de 30 livros publicados sobre conflitos, governação, incluindo questões do ambiente, e recentemente liderou um painel importante sobre o extremismo violento no continente africano, com enfoque no Oeste África. Vamos ter Honorable Dolo, que vem da União Africana. Ele é da região ocidental de África e vai nos dar a sua perspectiva sobre como é que olha para esta questão da relação do triplo nexus. Eu hoje estou aqui como moderador e facilitador desta discussão, que é uma série de eventos e atividades que estamos a realizar no sentido de promover maior coerência na resposta à situação de conflito em Cabo Delgado. Uma resposta que, no nosso entendimento, para evitar situações de o conflito se tornar intratável nas suas mais variadas manifestações agora, a necessidade de harmonia, coordenação e coerência e, provavelmente, definição de objetivos comuns entre a área humanitária, do desenvolvimento e da paz, que tem uma dimensão militar. Para começar, tenho a honra de convidar a diretora regional da Oxfam para nos dar as boas-vindas e notas de aberturas a essa sessão. Over to you, Honorable.
I think you will kindly allow me to speak from here. I am not getting the translation, the interpretation, sorry. And I think I sent the text to that effect to be guarded.
Organize. Magda, me des papel, por favor. The translation, please. The translation, please. The translation, please. But for the time being, I am inviting Oxfam Regional Director, Dialis Judge, to give the opening remarks. Okay, it seems she's not available at the moment. Okay, she's there. She cannot hear us. Whoa. Ela consegue nos ouvir agora? Honorable Dialis Judge, the Oxfam Director, to give us the opening remarks.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity that you've given me to speak at this very important meeting. I am hoping that you can hear me okay. And let me start with the acknowledgements and just recognize the presence of the Honorable Minister of Defense for the Republic of Mozambique, if he's on the call, the Governor for the province of Cabo Delgado, Professor Adriano Mvunga, Executive Director of CDD, the representatives from the various universities that are present with us today, and then representatives from the African Union. If you allow me, let me just say that all protocol is observed. I do note that there are of people that might not be aware about what Oxfam is. If you do allow me, let me just take a brief moment to speak about Oxfam. We see ourselves as a global movement for social justice, a movement of people who really are fighting inequality so that we can beat injustices such as poverty, not just for now, but also for the long term. And we see ourselves as a movement of millions of people who support communities to build better livelihoods, to grow in resilience, and to ensure that their lives are protected even in times of crisis. And so as Oxfam, we've been partnering with the Center for Democracy and Development, CDD, in Mozambique since 2017, a partnership that we truly appreciate. Oxfam currently partners with CDD in specific initiatives around the Oil for Development, the Natural Resource Governance and Peace Building Project in Cabo Delgado, and the Fair for All projects that we are undertaking in Mozambique. So it is really a privilege to speak at this platform, and I really wanted to situate the conversation from the point of view of Agenda 2063, if you would allow me. Agenda 2063 is very explicit on the kind of Africa we want. The opening statement of Agenda 2063 carries a statement with the voices of the African people, and it says the aspiration of the African people is to achieve a Pan-African vision of an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa, one that is driven by citizens. The Agenda 2063 aspiration number 4 speaks of the Africa we want, and it says that we want a peaceful and secure Africa to be achieved through mechanisms for peaceful prevention and resolution of conflict, which is centered on dialogue. It says that by 2020, all guns will be silent, and there will be a culture of peace and tolerance based on good governance, based on democracy, social inclusion, respect for human rights, justice, rule of law as the necessary preconditions for a peaceful and conflict-free continent. Those are really big aspirations that our people on the continent and in the country of Mozambique look at. In Agenda 2063, for example, the year 2020 was enshrined as a landmark year for silencing guns. And 2020 is past. 2 years on, we still have issues of poverty and inequality that are deepening due to protracted crisis. And 2 years on, in Mozambique, we are still talking about conflict. And this is one of the countries in this region that is affected in terms of the populations being presented as statistics in the African conflict reports and discussions. And we know that peace and security are the basic conditions for sustainable development and for attainment of social justice. We know that peace and the security landscape in Mozambique, as it is in other countries in the continent, are deteriorating. We are faced with a context where there's military action, where there's complex political tensions, worsening humanitarian needs that are increasing the levels of exclusion, increasing the levels of inequality, increasing poverty and suffering, and further perpetuating insecurity and conflict. And so you will agree with me that since October 2017, Cabo Delgado has been home to extremist violence, making hundreds of thousands of people displaced and in need of assistance. And this year, 2022, has witnessed major or mass displacements ever in the province. Displacements of thousands of people, and some of them are redisplaced even in the areas where they go to as the conflict escalates. And this is driving populations to unprecedented levels of suffering, with many lives, many livelihoods, and many people's hopes being lost and shattered. And ultimately, what we see is a reversal of all the development gains that would have been, present in this province, a colossal reversal of development gains. Violence and armed conflicts affect people's security, it affects people's livelihoods, and it forces them to flee from their homelands to locations where the unknown realities are present. In an environment where conflict and violence happen, women and children and the most marginalized people in the community, including the elderly, the chronically ill, people with disabilities, are the ones that bear the brunt of such violence. The youth also affected in many ways. Two things I'd like to highlight in terms of the youth: they become targets as victims, or they become targets as recruits that then are incorporated in further conflict. And these are the issues that we want to bottom out today and to take time to find solutions to. You will also agree with me that since the onset of the war in Ukraine, the Cabo Delgado crisis is becoming a forgotten one. Our people, our families, our brothers, our sisters will be among the hundreds of thousands of people in Cabo Delgado that gets displaced and have unmet needs. And with resources shifting to crises such as that in Ukraine, our government capacity in Mozambique will remain challenged in terms of assisting and providing that much needed support, to the increasing number of populations that are affected. As I conclude, I would like to talk about what our call to action is. It is really true that violent extremism escalates humanitarian and it increases these needs. It is also true in the case of Cabo Delgado, which is far from ending, seeing an end in the terms of the crisis that is there, that it will require continuous and sustained assistance in terms of meeting humanitarian development and peace building initiatives. Our call to action then would be at two levels. One is a call to action to the international community. As we started off with speaking about the diminishing resources due to the Ukraine crisis and others, we need to explore internal financing mechanisms that are needed in terms of responding to the crisis in Mozambique. This will definitely be a paradigm shift for the country, and it will be an example to other countries that are in a similar situation. Mozambique is a rich country that exists in a rich continent. Internal resource mobilization for humanitarian action, for peace building, and for development should be central to the conversations that we are going to be having. The AU has set up a humanitarian agency or is setting up a humanitarian agency. And the meeting that was held in Malabo this year, the Humanitarian Summit and Pledging Conference, had made quite some progressive steps towards the operationalization of the humanitarian agency. And we need to be able to get into that space and really amplify the internal resource mobilization and allocation mechanisms to be put in place as part of the agenda so that we can have predictable, we can have accountable investments to humanitarian and peace building initiatives. The second call to action is that we need national government and state as well as non-state actors to have a more coordinated and holistic response and support to communities and affected people, those that have to deal with the impacts of conflict and crisis. We are emphasizing a coordinated intervention to be guided by a collective response plan so that national authorities as well as non-state actors can ensure that there is assistance that is complementary in nature, that is fair, that is safe, that is inclusive, and that is responsive to the special needs of women and children and those of displaced communities as well as host communities. We think that a coordinated approach will provide sustainability of outcomes of any interventions that we do. Further call to our national government is to seek ways in which the warring parties in Cabo Delgado could lower their guns in keeping with the aspirations of Agenda 2063. We need to put an end to this conflict. It not only fuels displacements, but it also disrupts a lot of things like the food security systems, the social protection systems. And in this regard, we need to support our leaders and to compel them and the international community to adopt approaches, some of which we are going to suggest here as solutions, in ways that then they're able to respond to the three dimensions that we started off with, the humanitarian, development, and peace nexus. And it is in the interest of our leaders to sustain any development gains that are there. In conclusion, allow me to just state that we also need to be deliberate about listening to the voices of the affected people on what interventions could best address their humanitarian development and security needs, and to have a peaceful and secure life. And to this audience, my appeal is that it really is not our intention to shame anyone, but it is our intention to seek solutions through conversation, to seek lasting solutions on how we can build that interconnectedness between these three dimensions of humanitarian development and peace building, so that our citizens in Cabo, like any other place where there's conflict in Africa, can actually survive, and beyond surviving, that they can thrive. So I really look forward to the participation of everyone, and I look forward to learning from you as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Judge, for those opening remarks. We will proceed. I'm now inviting Professor Liazat Bonat. Professor Liazat Bonat will set the foundations for this discussion today. She will briefly give a snapshot of what the root causes are of the conflict in Cabo Delgado and how, what is the current status of the conflict, so that based on that, we can then look at the various interventions and how the triple nexus approach can help to build coherence in order to prevent a situation of the intractability of the conflict. Over to you, Professor. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I would like to greet Professor Salih, that we know each other from a long time ago, and also all the colleagues and listeners. And I'm going to present some of the initial findings of our research project on Cabo Delgado conflict that we are realizing through the research at Christian Michelsen Institute in Norway. It is funded by the Research Council of Norway. I am going to speak in Portuguese. I hope the translation is working now. Yes? Okay. Yes. Thank you. And I would like to thank Professor Adriano Mvunga and CDC for this opportunity for me to present some of the ideas that we were able to come or some of the conclusions, maybe very initial in our research so far. Ok, boa tarde, estimados colegas e ouvintes. Eu vou falar em português. Eu vou falar um pouco a respeito do conflito em Cabo Delgado e as coisas que influenciaram, as causas ou algumas outras razões e talvez sugerir algumas interpretações ao que está acontecendo lá. Eu estou a falar a partir de algumas investigações iniciais realizadas pela o Instituto de Christian Michelsen em Bergen, Noruega, e financiado pelo Conselho de Investigação da Noruega, que foca o conflito em Cabo Delgado. Então, para iniciar, embora há discórdias a respeito de definições, o conflito em Cabo Delgado parece ser uma insurgência ou uma resistência, e de acordo com muitos estudos até agora realizados, parece ser uma resistência ou insurgência contra o Estado moçambicano, concebido por seus opositores como um Estado corrupto que abusa do poder. A base de uma insurgência geralmente é insatisfação ou descontentamento, percepções de injustiça, tais como a discriminação, marginalização, perseguições ou de serem preteridos nos seus direitos básicos. Pode ser uma também percepção de serem enganados, maltratados, etc., injustamente. Uma insurgência responde às necessidades psicológicas e emocionais também, para além de causas meramente básicas, e tudo isso serve para desencadear e justificar uma violência. Até agora, o conflito se revela como uma insurgência irregular, no sentido clássico da atividade política militar prolongada, voltada para o controle total ou parcial dos recursos de uma região, por meio do uso de forças militares irregulares e organizações também políticas ilegais. Os atos, incluindo guerrilha, terrorismo, mobilização política, propaganda, recrutamento e clandestinidade, são projetados para enfraquecer o controle e legitimidade do Estado e para aumentar o controle e a legitimidade dos insurgentes. Por outro lado, a proclamação de uma jihad e a aliança ao Estado Islâmico, a organização terrorista internacional, sugerem tratar-se também de uma expressão do jihadismo transnacional ou translocal. A existência, ou às vezes também uma escolha consciente de uma ideologia que parece ser viável e mais forte neste momento em comparação com as outras ideologias, também está visível. Outro aspecto que podemos notar é a internalização, isso é apoio translocal, sobretudo do foro ideológico e moral, mas também provavelmente material. Mas isso não significa que todos os seguidores dessa insurgência ou participantes acreditam completamente no objetivo final dessa ideologia, e neste caso trata-se da ideologia jihadista transnacional, ancorada na ideologia do Estado Islâmico. Por exemplo, a imposição do Sharia, a criação do Estado Islâmico, pode não ser o objetivo de todos que aderiram a esse movimento, mas meramente as pessoas aderam por ser uma ideologia que dá a maior oportunidade nesse momento para confrontar o inimigo, exprimir a sua insatisfação e justificar a violência. Mas essa ideologia global sofre mutações nas regiões onde vai expandindo-se, incorporando e sendo modificada por interpretações locais, às vezes sendo adotada para explicar conflitos e ideologias locais e também interesses pragmáticos. Vários atores que participam no grupo ou na insurgência, portanto, podem ter motivos diferentes, mas os líderes, bem como os seguidores, têm mais sucesso em recrutar membros e angariar apoio quando enfatizam fatores estruturais locais, como pobreza, desigualdade econômica, falta de acesso ao emprego, ao poder e à segurança. A adesão ao extremismo islâmico em Cabo Delgado pode ter ocorrido gradualmente durante a insurgência, mesmo que tenha sido no início encabeçado por jovens radicais. Em muitos desses conflitos sobressai um elemento de rebelião da juventude, ou seja, a tensão geracional, por exemplo, contra líderes religiosos mais velhos em mesquitas específicas, como foi o caso na ADF, Boko Haram e Al-Hijra de Quênia. E com a maioria dos países subsaarianos marcados por altas taxas de natalidade e populações jovens, mas com economias em deterioração em contexto neoliberal, os jovens têm cada vez mais dificuldade em obter acesso à educação, ao emprego, à promoção social e à representação política. A competição por esses serviços, direitos e privilégios marca, em maior ou menor grau, as relações entre as diferentes gerações e, concomitantemente, torna-se um fator nos sistemas políticos pós-coloniais em várias revoltas violentas que emergiram como resultado do bloqueio de mobilidade social ou da comunicação política entre as gerações. Stig Hansen argumenta que para o jihadismo transnacional se expandir numa determinada região deve existir um ambiente propício e fértil para explorar pontos de entrada emocionais, mas também deve haver um protagonismo ideológico dos militantes. Portanto, em termos de antecedentes, havia salafismo e wahhabismo em Moçambique desde os anos 1950, mas nunca provocou jihad. A história mostra que o norte de Moçambique nunca foi isolado do Islã global e regional e tinha laços muito estreitos com costa leste africana, Tanzânia, Quênia, Somália e Comoros. Mas todos esses laços e ligações não desencadearam jihad até pelo menos o que nós conhecemos, né, que é em 2017. Temos que assinalar que, geralmente, quando houver muçulmanos, a radicalização estará latente, porque a ideologia política religiosa é disponível, né? E mais moçambicanos sempre souberam disso e eles souberam de vários casos de manifestações de jihadismo anteriores, por exemplo, na Somália, Quênia, Uganda, Camoros e Tanzânia, mas nunca se manifestaram em Moçambique. Então, a questão continua sendo por que em 2017 e por que em Cabo Delgado, né? Por exemplo, Nampula e Inhassa têm números dos muçulmanos também muito elevados. Então, parece que existe um ambiente propício e fértil em Cabo Delgado para que o jihadismo penetre e se expanda. Entre os quais as práticas excludentes de governança política e econômica, das instituições locais ou centrais do Estado, tensões étnicas, marginalização, má administração, corrupção, violência policial, tensões entre centro e periferia e outros, que já foram assinalados por vários estudos até agora realizados, parecem fertilizar o solo para o florescimento do jihadismo. Outra questão, claro, são transformações violentas e a insatisfação com os resultados ou processos dessas transformações, que também servem de base para um conflito violento. Em jeito de hipótese, vamos ver o que mudou e o que pode ter causado a insatisfação. Temos que ter em conta que a região já estava mergulhada numa violência de longa duração desde os tempos pré-coloniais. Eram conflitos adormecidos ou latentes, mas que sobressaem nos momentos de grandes transformações sociais ou políticas e econômicas na região. Portanto, a nova indústria extrativa parece ter contribuído bastante para essa transformação e também gerado conflitos que resultaram, no fim, a adesão de alguma parte da população jovem ao jihadismo internacional. Isso não é uma coisa isolada para Moçambique. Em muitas sociedades produtoras de gás e petróleo, o extremismo violento é gerado por agravos reais ou geralmente são expressões de queixas e agravos pré-existentes com uma forte penetração histórica. Nós podemos ver que houve conflitos em torno de terras, em torno de oportunidades que a população, sobretudo os jovens, criou expectativas em torno de indústria extrativa que não se realizou do ponto de vista de alguns deles, né? O que podemos concluir, então, é que mesmo que o Estado Islâmico e outras organizações jihadistas internacionais desapareçam ou enfraquecem, a ideologia por si só vai continuar sobrevivendo, porque ela sobreviveu e foi transformando, modificando, adaptando a vários contextos ao longo da história, né? As pessoas vão pegar nela, apoderar-se e transformar e reinterpretar. E mesmo que o Estado Islâmico como organização desapareça, a ideologia continuará viva e seria levada adiante por outros islamistas. Islamistas aqui no sentido de indivíduos que interpretam o Islã em relação aos objetivos políticos, não a religiosos islâmicos no geral, né? Pode-se dizer que é como abrir a caixa de Pandora, né? Então, não se devia deixar acontecer a partida, mas se aconteceu, não tem volta, a não ser por meio de um trabalho muito lento e muito longo de retificar as consequências. Isso deve ser feito com muita paciência, envolvendo as comunidades afetadas, providenciando apoio não só às vítimas, mas também aos jovens que se engajaram no jihad, oferecendo saídas para que abandonem a violência, criando programas de radicalização, vias para amnistia, centros de apoio psicológico e de educação para a vida pacífica. A outra solução menos atraente seria fazer como a Rússia fez, por exemplo, em Chechênia, ou o Egito com a Irmandade Muçulmana. Isso é manter toda a população sob vigilância e controle pela força de segurança do Estado, prender, torturar e fazer desaparecer os suspeitos e instalar autoritarismo absoluto. Finalmente, a terceira via é militar, com vista a derrotar e eliminar o jihadismo transnacional. Mas como mostra a experiência de várias regiões do mundo, mas concretamente em África, por exemplo, no Tchad, Mali, Nigéria, Etiópia e Quênia, e de intervenção da Etiópia e Quênia e Somália, nós podemos ver que essas intervenções criaram uma retração dos jihadistas, mas não os derrotaram completamente. Por isso, o combate ao jihadismo transnacional corre o risco de se transformar em guerras para sempre. No caso da Cabo Delgado, só o futuro revelará o verdadeiro impacto da intervenção militar em curso, mas a dimensão militar é necessária por se tratar de uma insurgência militar ou de guerrilha. Entretanto, não se pode negligenciar as outras dimensões, tais como sociais e econômicas. Essas devem também ter uma visibilidade pública e ter resultados concretos, pois só com resultados visíveis é possível desengajar os elos fracos de insurgência, tais como os insatisfeitos que se aliaram a ela, mas não partilham a ideologia por completo, e os que se aliaram à insurgência por várias outras razões que não têm nada a ver com a ideologia jihadista, os simpatizantes que não participam diretamente na guerrilha militar, mas apoiam moralmente e economicamente, Isso também vai prevenir a expansão e encurtar a continuidade de violência, embora a violência perpetrada por insurgência pode ter repelido alguns desses apoiantes e simpatizantes. Isso é porque a violência de insurgência também é muito forte. Alguma parte dessas pessoas que inicialmente simpatizaram, se calhar, já não estão engajados lá. Entretanto, o facto de desordem pode atrair muitos elementos criminosos e oportunistas que vejam nessa desordem e caos a oportunidade para perpetrar os crimes e também para fazer algumas atividades relacionadas com tráfico e outras coisas. Mas essas atividades por si só não são centrais à insurgência em curso. Muito obrigado.
Deve ser de manhã ainda em Trindade e Tobago.
Sim, são novas. Obrigado.
E desculpa lhe levantar muito cedo para discutir assunto tão importante como este, sobre este Moçambique, o país que ama. Eu sei que daqui a pouco está a voltar para aqui, né?
Sim.
Boa viagem de regresso. Muito obrigado. Voltamos para si. Eu convido agora o professor João Machatine. João Machatine, que é o homem forte da ADIN, ouviu atentamente a apresentação da professora Eliazate Bonatti. A minha pergunta para si é: a ADIN, a agência que o governo criou, naquilo que é o seu trabalho, não só de fazer, mas de coordenar toda a resposta, está a atacar este assunto, ou o que vê em Cabo Delgado e na Zona Norte responde a este problema que está a ser colocado, ou não? Obrigado.
Muito obrigado, professor Nvunga, e complementar os painelistas e os outros ouvintes em diferentes quadrantes do mundo. Bom, primeiro dizer que vou falar sobre a DIN, não vou falar em nome da DIN, e vou falar da região norte e não em nome da região norte. É uma região que, de facto, tenho estado a trabalhar no terreno, no âmbito da Agência de Desenvolvimento do Norte e em outros âmbitos, tendo em conta o contexto. A Agência de Desenvolvimento Integrado do Norte foi criada num contexto. Este contexto coincide com o surgimento e a escalada da insurgência na província de Cabo Delgado. Então, tudo quanto a agência possa fazer em diferentes dimensões reduz-se ao nível de redução ou incremento da situação de estabilidade, da situação de segurança em Cabo Delgado. Todavia, a ADIN tem mais um papel de coordenação, de promoção e de facilitação. Nesse processo todo, interage com diferentes atores, quer do governo, quer privados, quer da sociedade civil. Muitas pessoas perguntam se a ADIN é executora, é implementadora. Depende das dimensões do que estamos a dizer, implementadora ou executora. Mas talvez antes de focar nesse assunto, talvez atacar algumas das coisas que ouvi dos dois interlocutores que me antecederam. O problema que temos em Cabo Delgado, se eu supor em termos comparativos que a população de Cabo Delgado seja semelhante, por exemplo, em termos de crença, em termos de religioso, fosse semelhante, por exemplo, à população de Sofala ou à população de Inhambane, qual seria a cobertura ideológica ou a cobertura interpretativa que teríamos? Diríamos era o radicalismo cristão? Diríamos era o radicalismo tradicional? Então, esse elemento de referencial para definir e identificar o que está acontecendo em Cabo Delgado pode nos levar a dimensões que eventualmente possam comprometer o melhor diagnóstico do que se deve fazer. Essa é a primeira coisa. Portanto, diagnósticos variados vão nos lidar a soluções variadas. A população de Cabo Delgado ou a população da região norte calhou que tenha a maior parte da população que professa a religião islâmica. Então, nos olhos de quem está fora da região da África, na região de Cabo Delgado, e em termos comparativos, o interesse em compreender o fenômeno é visto prima facie em qual é a semelhança entre os atores envolvidos naquilo que se chama hoje conflito, com outras latitudes, com a Nigéria, com Burkina Faso, com o Chad, por aí fora. Então, se a partir desses quadrantes dizer que, olha, a população é islâmica, são muçulmanos, então os pesquisadores todos, então vamos procurar causas semelhantes. Esse é um aspecto. Agora, o governo de Moçambique compreendeu a complexidade da situação e quero concordar com algumas das abordagens que foram apresentadas pela pesquisa, que de facto existiram aí descontentamento, existiram expectativas acima das possibilidades de satisfação e existiram respostas talvez excessivas num ambiente em que a população estava com muita expectativa. Então, tudo isso aí resultou naquilo que hoje chamamos insurgência em Cabo Delgado. Agora, o outro aspecto que é importante sublinhar é a população da região norte. A população da região norte não está interessada em teoria, está interessada em coisas práticas. Ora, até aqui, as ações, quer sejam feitas na frente, envolve as Forças de Defesa e Segurança, na frente social, na frente econômica, na frente de coordenação, na frente de mobilização de recursos públicos internos e externos, na frente de mobilização de recursos privados corporativos, da ajuda ao desenvolvimento. Todas essas ações, a interrogação, o que se observa no terreno é que há uma falta gritante do entrosamento. A componente militar, como dizia o antecessor, disse que a componente militar é fundamental porque a insurgência é militar. Mas os militares, quando fazem as suas ações, o conceito de ocupar espaço em termos militares não é ocupar espaço para transformar e voltar à situação anterior. É ocupar espaço para permitir a progressão para a outras frentes de combate. O que acontece é que as ações militares não têm um entrosamento calculado para a ocupação de espaço quando eles libertam certas zonas. Isso por quê? Primeiro, porque a sociedade civil ou o setor privado, para poder ter certeza de que o espaço já ocupado pelas Forças de Defesa e Segurança se já inspira confiança para eles entrarem lá, é preciso que haja uma componente que possa comunicar que as condições já estão lá criadas. E dou um exemplo prático para não ser teórico. A SADC está lá, na região norte, no formato da SAMIM, e a Força em Estado de Alerta da SADC tem o modus operandi. Em termos estruturais, a SADC é composta, esse tipo de missão é composta por 3 componentes. Componente militar, cuja missão é reduzir a capacidade ofensiva e a capacidade de iniciativa do inimigo. A componente policial, uma vez o inimigo reduzido a esse nível, é necessário trazer a componente cuja tarefa fundamental é da lei e ordem. E a componente 3 é a componente civil, que tem a tarefa fundamental de ir verificar as questões de direitos humanos, as questões de recuperação, de reconciliação da família, as questões das mulheres, do gênero e humanitária e para fora. Agora a questão é, estamos aí. Esses componentes já estão lá no terreno, porque a componente militar coordenar com a componente civil, quer seja da Secretaria do Estado, quer seja do governo da província, quer seja das ONG, por razões tipicamente de operações militares, é impossível haver um porta-voz diário que diz agora vamos progredir para Miangaleu, agora vamos progredir para Kisanga, agora vamos para Mucojo. Não existe esse tipo de coisa em termos de operações militares. Todavia, quando a componente civil estivesse no lugar, essa aí tem mais possibilidade, espaço, para interagir com a sociedade civil e inspirar confiança de que naquela zona a sociedade civil já pode vir para fazer o seu trabalho, quer social, quer econômico, e por aí fora. Portanto, o que está a acontecer exatamente neste momento, essa é a parte de dificuldade, mas todavia não se está parado. Na frente militar, não vou falar muito sobre isso aí, porque muita gente já sabe, a informação corre. A frente social, o que é que exatamente está acontecendo? Essa parte aqui reduz mais na área de assistência humanitária. A assistência humanitária está reduzida a zonas seguras. Zonas seguras em Cabo Delgado, quais são? São os distritos a sul. Anquabe, Chiure, Montepuez, ali Metuge. Mas onde o problema deve ser resolvido é nos distritos que foram profundamente afetados. Essa é a parte que está a faltar. E por que está a faltar? Porque falta o entrosamento de operações entre a componente civil e a componente militar. A frente econômica, da mesma maneira, a frente econômica é fundamental inspirar confiança nos agentes econômicos. É Mucojo, é Kisanga, é Macomia, até é Meluco. É preciso os agentes econômicos dizer que há segurança. Mas por falta de interação, de comunicação entre esses agentes, esses atores, nós estamos a verificar grande atraso. As Forças de Defesa e Segurança ocuparam Miangaleu, Messala há muito tempo. Quem é o agente econômico já lá foi? Ainda não. Razão, a dificuldade de comunicação entre a componente militar e a componente civil. Portanto, mas na componente de coordenação, a componente de coordenação, o governo aprovou recentemente 2 instrumentos fundamentais. Um, PRCD, o Programa de Reconstrução de Cabo Delgado, que tem as suas componentes, e, em termos da sua implementação, as organizações da sociedade civil são convidados permanentes. Não pedem para estar nas reuniões de coordenação e de planificação e de execução. Não pedem. São membros e é decidido pelo governo. Isso é coordenado pelo secretário de Estado, juntamente com o governador da província. Agora, vem para as sessões disso aí ou não? Irei falar de um aspecto que é muito fundamental, que é preciso refletir. A todos aqueles que querem trabalhar em Cabo Delgado terão que ter em conta esse elemento. É que as organizações da sociedade civil domésticas ou nacionais e estrangeiras vão para lá com certas regras. Com certas regras. Quando chegam, o governo diz, olha, o que você está a fazer em Betuge? O que você está a fazer em Anquabe? Porque eles têm as regras que devem obedecer. E uma das principais regras é as organizações da sociedade civil devem ter uma certa equidistância e não podem se confundir como se fosse o prolongamento do governo. Por outro lado, o governo vê as organizações da sociedade civil como querendo fazer as suas coisas à parte. Então, essa parte aí é que temos que sentar, e penso que este diálogo que temos tido com o CDD tem amenado e tem reduzido este espaço, e posso dizer que em relação à ADN, acho que esse espaço já está reduzido, porque já existe um entendimento o que é que temos que fazer junto. O outro aspecto está relacionado com os parceiros externos. Os parceiros externos, quando disponibilizam recursos, a principal regra no hemisfério norte é tudo menos armas, tudo menos questões de segurança. Entretanto, em Cabo Delgado a situação é de segurança. Será que o CDD, será que os outros aí, não vou dizer o nome para não fazer publicidade, será que podem dizer, olha, nós queremos ir reforçar o trabalho da polícia na perseguição e na investigação e identificação de insurgentes infiltrados na população? Vão poder financiar. O princípio de tudo menos armas também aplica-se nesse caso. É um aspecto. Então, o governo não para e a DIN não para, vai mobilizando recursos e, neste preciso momento, o Banco Mundial, o Sistema das Nações Unidas, tem providenciado o seu apoio para a implementação de diversos programas. Agora, por que nos últimos tempos tem-se visto o alastrar dos distritos a norte e centro para sul? A grande interrogação que está aí, e para mim nem é interrogação, a resposta está lá, é que enquanto não se fazer o trabalho para a juventude poder sentir que existe alternativa naquele cinturão que divide a zona norte e a zona sul, ali vai se alastrar para o sul. Então, o que está a ser feito? Primeiro, é necessário concentrar as energias nos distritos que fazem o limite com os distritos profundamente afetados. Primeiro. A segunda coisa, é necessário atacar as sedes distritais dos distritos já livres de insurgentes, isso para inspirar não só as populações, não só a juventude, mas sobretudo os agentes econômicos, porque são eles que vão criar emprego, são eles que vão poder atrair jovens, que são eles que vão poder criar condições para que aqueles que querem criar as capacidades de emprego e empregabilidade possam chegar. E posso dizer aqui que, por exemplo, Mocimbo da Praia, a simples presença de da polícia, e não apenas dos militares, inspirou agentes econômicos que estavam refugiados em Moeda. Já estão a produzir pão a partir do Mocimbo da Praia, e o mesmo acontece em pão. Portanto, em jeito inicial, é que há muita coisa que está a ser feita lá, em Cabo Delgado, e creio que a DIN, com a melhor coordenação, com todos os atores, sobretudo da sociedade civil, talvez seja eu acredito muito o papel da sociedade civil, porque a sociedade civil, ela é que consegue penetrar até a base. O governo pode ter suas estruturas, mas a sociedade civil é que sabe onde está o régulo. A sociedade civil é que sabe onde está a estrutura, a autoridade local. A sociedade civil tem mais tempo para ir ao detalhe. Então, por causa disso, acho que a ADIN, neste momento, terá que reforçar essa componente de coordenação com a organização da sociedade civil, quer aqueles para a área humanitária, quer para a área econômica, quer para a área de investigação, para compreender melhor as causas, porque não são únicas que foram aqui indicadas. Portanto, isto é que eu diria inicialmente, talvez mais adiante poderemos conversar.
Muito obrigado, professor João Machatini, por essas considerações, que são iniciais, sobre aquilo que é o trabalho da ADIN e a situação geral da resposta a Cabo Delgado. Vai intervir agora a Marta Licuco, que fala a partir do escritório do CDD em Pemba. Marta Licuco é defensora de direitos humanos. Ela é uma grande líder, é líder de Paquete. Ela liderou com muita dor a questão dos refugiados internos que se abatem na província de Cabo Delgado, quando chegavam em massa ali às praias de Paquete. Marta Licuco, por favor, boa tarde. Marta Licuco. Está com problemas, né? Okay. I was told she's having difficulties to connect. She will connect anytime. She's speaking from Cabo Delgado. We had Professor Bonat presenting on the root causes and the current dynamics of the conflict, as well as the three approaches to respond to the violent extremism. We had Professor João Machatini talking about the response from the ADIN perspective and the challenges, the coordination, and the call he made for collective work in order to lead to a successful intervention. Now I have Dr. Alan Bryden from DCAF. I also have the Emeritus Professor Mohamed Sali. He's in the Netherlands. Dr. Alan Bryden is in Geneva, Switzerland. And Honorable Ernest Dolo is from the African Union, the East Africa desk at the African Union, to respond to some of these challenges, the root causes, the policy response, and the question to you is, based on your experiences from other contexts in other parts, how do you assess this response? Is this leading to a successful intervention, or it might take us to a situation of intractability of the conflict, which would mean that Mozambique would be prevented from peace, security and peace, but also, importantly, being denied an opportunity of being a gas market in the northern region, which is a potential game changer for the country. Alan Bryden, over to you.
Adriano, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I'd like to acknowledge all the eminent speakers and participants in this this important webinar. I work for DCAF. DCAF is an independent Swiss-based not-for-profit foundation that works around the world to promote good security governance. We work in a partnership model, providing direct support to nationally driven processes to improve oversight and accountability of the security sector. And really working along that point that was mentioned by previous speakers to try and reinforce security in a way that doesn't roll back development gains through insecurity. So I'm really happy to speak to this question of the nexus between humanitarian development and peace building, peace processes, because as an organization we're committed to holistic, integrated approaches. We also believe that good governance, including good securities governance, is a thread that links all these different activities. And finally, and it's something that all of the speakers so far alluded to, we need to be honest that there's a tension that needs to be addressed, or a balance struck between responsible international engagement in these processes and national ownership of humanitarian development and peace building agendas. And that's a challenge, and I think this nexus is a good way to look at that challenge. Now, I think this linkage is challenging enough if we look at the traditional community of actors involved in humanitarian development and peace work. However, I think it's even more challenging in the context of Cabo Delgado, because the private sector is often left out of these processes. And that's a mistake, because I don't think you can address this nexus without understanding and engaging with business, notably the extractive sector in northern Mozambique. And this is why DCAF supports the Voluntary Principles on Security and Human Rights, which is, in effect, an international multi-stakeholder initiative that tries to bring together governments, civil society, and major international mining, oil and gas companies. But most importantly, it tries to roll out these processes for a little over a year and a half with CDD in partnership to support the implementation of such a process in Mozambique. So in answering Professor Nvunga's question, I'd like to lean on that live process and maybe some insights that can provide to try and answer this question of what can work and what can be further developed in Cabo Delgado in this area. But maybe first I'd like to tease out a bit more two challenges to this so-called triple nexus. And I don't want to talk about individual activities, but really what makes it hard to link these different aspects of response and have impact. One, and it's already been mentioned, a lack of coherence and coordination between actors and interventions. One reason for that is simply complexity. We're talking about diverse sets of activities, involving different intervention logics, funding streams, and so forth. Another aspect of that is people, quite simply. People who work in these different areas come from different knowledge communities, different backgrounds, different cultures, and that makes it complicated to work together. A third point about the lack of coherence is, let's be honest, coordination and coherence is a challenge because it's not just technical, it's political. And those political elements mean that often local, provincial, and national authorities don't coordinate effectively, that the international community is not coherent in its approach, and, as I mentioned already, that there's a lack of engagement with the private sector. And a final point I would make about coordination is you can't be coordinated if you don't have a seat at the table. And I think in a number of these processes, there is a lack of agency and space for civil society to engage meaningfully, and that really needs to be addressed. And that brings me to, I think, the second challenge that's equally, if not more important, and that's the imperative for all actors engaged in humanitarian development and peace-related activities to adopt a rights-based approach. A key question around all these accountability to initiatives. What's the role of the understanding of civil society and the media? What role for Parliament? If the answer is not much, then there's an issue. Related to that, all aspects of this triple nexus need to be in sync in terms of values. So, to put it bluntly, if security interventions don't respect people's human rights and security, then that undermines work on development and peace building. So, what can be done to foster this humanitarian development and peace nexus in Cabo Delgado? Well, as Professor Navunga mentioned at the outset, DCAF is supporting CDD to develop a national voluntary principles implementation process. This is a process that's under the leadership of the Ministry of Justice and has strong support from a range of other government departments, companies, and civil society actors. And when we talk about national implementation of the voluntary principles, we're actually talking about the creation of a multi-stakeholder process that's founded on building greater trust and cooperation between national and regional authorities, the security sector, companies, and communities. And indeed, we've seen, working in other complex contexts in Nigeria, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and elsewhere, that if you can build this trust, if you can have this engagement, you can find new, more joined up and more effective ways to do business. What's actually happened in this area in the last 18 months, I think, is quite a lot of important progress in a short period of time. A national working group was created in November 2021 with CDD as the secretariat, led by the Ministry of Justice, but reuniting a wide group of representatives from these three pillars, from national authorities, civil society, and companies. There's been a demonstrated level of political will at the highest levels, including from the President to support this initiative. Some research and analysis has been generated on the challenges in Cabo Delgado linked to the extractive sector, security and human rights. And most recently, in March, a working group was created in Cabo Delgado, and there now the work is very much turning to implementation, and in particular, a focus on monitoring of the security and human rights situation. So based on that, I think there are maybe 5 lessons that I could identify that have wider relevance for the topic today. One is indeed the importance of bringing all relevant stakeholders together. When the Cabo Delgado working group was launched, the Secretary of State and the Provincial Governor were present. Adine, the professor, was there, as were representatives from civil society, from companies, from different government ministries. This needs to continue and to be built on. It means that these actors need to work together, share experience, build trust, and create bridges between what's happening in Cabo Delgado and the capital. Because it may be that responses to a number of the challenges that bridge humanitarian development and peace require structural changes, that may require new laws or other types of engagements. So I think that linkage is very important. I'd say a second ongoing lesson is the need for a simple common language across everyone that's involved. People engaged in these areas, particularly international partners, I have to say, often overcomplicate things, use jargonistic, complex language, and there's a real need to simplify and be clear on objectives, on activities, and spend the time to engage with different parties to make sure everyone's on the same page. And another part of that common language is that everyone falls in line behind an outcome-oriented approach, that we all agree on the end state goals that we're trying to achieve. And then activities will fall in behind that. But if you're not clear on what you're trying to achieve, not much is going to work. A third key lesson from the voluntary principles process that I would draw, and I mentioned it already, is reinforcing the role of civil society in these processes in order to join the dots. And that role for civil society doesn't mean representation. It doesn't just mean a seat at the table. It means being involved in the design and the decision-making around these processes. That also requires a strong commitment to building the capacity of civil society to engage effectively with government, with international partners and others on these issues. And that's something that can either be very practical or can be targeted at specific thematic needs and challenges, such as gender-based violence, for example. The fourth maybe point or sort of insight is to ensure that the policies and programs that are developed in these areas are based on an up-to-date and regularly refreshed understanding of what's actually happening in the ground, in the localities, linked to security, linked to human rights. That's why the work led by CDD in Cabo Delgado at the moment is really focusing on setting up this security and human rights monitoring capacity in key localities. Because that's essential in order to prioritize, to catalyze the right responses. And also without that, you can't measure. You can't measure if things are moving in a good direction or not. And I think that the last point that I'd like to make relates to international support. I think first of all, I'd very much like to stand behind the remarks of the distinguished director for Oxfam of the need and the importance of internal financing for these activities, African-driven, national-driven support for national processes. But indeed, there is a reality and a continued reality of the need for international support for these processes. And what we see from our perspective is the need for more coherence and coordination of that international support. Now, the work we're supporting on the voluntary principles is very small compared to the efforts and the engagement of actors like the World Bank, the UN system, and others. But I think there are some insights that are relevant. One is that the support that we receive is channeled through a multi-donor platform. So essentially, we have the UK and Switzerland pooling their funding and their engagement, which enables a longer-term, more programmatic commitment rather than one-off jobs. What's also important from that support is it doesn't just come from capitals, although that's very important. It's linked to Swiss Development Corporation in Mozambique, to the British High Commission, so you have a more integrated response there. I would also say that both these new working groups that have been created in Maputo and Pemba, they're in effect platforms for coordination. And one shouldn't be too fixated about labels like the voluntary principles. Mechanisms have been created that have brought together key stakeholders that have a role to play in humanitarian development and peace-related activities. And that can be used. That can and should be used. And maybe the final point linked to that support, security and human rights issues around the extractive sector are just one way of looking at wider security issues that affect the situation on the ground in Cabo Delgado. There I would take the example of public security forces, training of public security forces in issues around human rights, international humanitarian law. The voluntary principles is an entry point to have conversations about what can be done and to coordinate where there's a lot of different things going on. But actually what's more interesting and what's more sustainable is saying, well, how can training be addressed at the national level to ensure that there are sustained national capacities to train public security forces, to embed human rights systematically in curricula. And I think that's where a small entry point or conversation can lead to much wider issues around security governance. So those are the remarks I wanted to contribute from a DCAP perspective. I think I just conclude by saying that nothing succeeds like success, and if we can find small examples of these activities being more integrated, being better coordinated, we can build out from there. And we need to amplify that, and that's why fora like this one today are so important. So thank you very much all for your attention. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alan Bryden. You have nailed it precisely at the point. The tone, the message, the focus, that is super. You have nailed it. Thank you very much, Alan. I'll get back to you. But now I move on to Honorable Ernest Dolo, East Africa Desk, Political Affairs, Peace and Security Department of the African Union. Honorable.
Good afternoon to everyone.
Good afternoon. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor. I remember 2 weeks ago we met in Addis Ababa, your first time to visit this part of the continent. And I think this is what you said in your introductory, remarks. And I remember your very, very detailed and comprehensive presentation that made some of us to really understand the dynamics of the situation in Cabo Delgado. It was really, really a pleasant time that we were able to connect. And I remember when you told me, look, we have a webinar and I want you to be a part of it to share your own experience as a field worker in the area of peace and security. So I say thank you so much. And I recognize and appreciate and everyone or the panelists. I'm sorry that I cannot call your names, but let me say in traditional terms, all protocols observed. I am speaking here from my own experience and my own perspective, not from the view of the African Union. I am speaking as a field professional working in the area of peace and security. So words that you will hear from me will not be a representation of the African Union, but practical experiences from the field in the area of peace and security where I work. Well, thank you to all the presenters for this brilliant presentation, these brilliant presentations, and I like their interventions. But I would like to also add, based on my own experience, to say that from what I've heard, the problems in Cabo Delgado, in fact, started in the 1900s, deep down in the 1915, and recounting to the 1970s, and now in 2017, when it took the current phase that we see today, which means jihadi insurgency. I am not going to speak to this, but what I want to point to is that in our intervention, first and foremost, I know this has been done, of course, you have brilliant people on the field, but first and foremost, from my own experience, the thing to do at the beginning is what to understand the motive of the insurgency itself. That I want to believe it has been done because the root causes have been identified. What is the motive? Colleagues have been speaking about various insurgencies on the continent, including in Somalia and in Nigeria and the rest of it, as well as Cabo Delgado. But comparatively, what would be the motive of the insurgency in Cabo Delgado? The insurgents, are they there to stay? Or are they there to just polish the area? Is there anything like governance in their mindset or in their modus operandi? Those are questions that should be coming to us. In some countries on the continent, or even if I can say one, of course I will not call the name of the country, we have jihadis whose motive is to come and stay, they want to govern. And so their connection with the local population in the area they control is very, very solid. They have very solid connection with the local population to the extent that maybe when the national forces maybe enter, I say maybe, you may want to believe that the local population will even trust the insurgents themselves more than their own, national forces. So understanding the motive is very, very key. So once we understand the motive, our next step is to design strategies to disconnect the local population from the insurgents. Let us all remember that it is from the local population that the insurgents can recruit. And their mode of recruitment can be at two levels. One, the willingness of some of the youth. Some youthful persons could say, yes, I want to join, because I feel marginalized, I feel XYZ, the root causes of the conflict itself. And the second is forceful recruitment. You come and stage attacks and you capture people to force them into your insurgency without their will. So whether or not any of these two recruitment policies or practices can work with the insurgents. So disconnecting the local population from the insurgency is very, very key. And disconnecting them should also respect certain core. You should respect the national and the local ownership of any initiative that we want to do. You want to disconnect these people. How do you do it? This process, who owns it? The local population. Who do you want to protect? Is the local population. So they should own that process. From the national level, yes, overall, at the national level is the national authority. Then from there, where are we undertaking these initiatives? It's right there at the local level. It's one of the areas where I remember one of our speakers, sorry sir, I cannot recognize the name again, but you spoke about it today. The identification and the role of the civil society, it is where it becomes key. So Local ownership will mean what? The alignment of all activities to local needs and aspirations. What are the needs of these local populations before, during, and even after the conflict itself? So what are their aspirations? Of course, we all know that they aspire for peace. But what are the needs that we want to, so we include them and allow them to own the process that we will design. And the next core to respect is inclusiveness. My colleague who just spoke now said it all. In terms of inclusiveness, he's just said it. You cannot walk, and leave any other person behind. Any other person will be an organization, the local level persons themselves, the grassroots. Every actor should be involved. If we want to move, we should move with one voice, one action. One action meaning we are geared towards one goal, and that goal is stabilization, sustained development. So you don't discriminate, everybody is equal in terms of forging on for one goal. The diversity of actors and the pressure for peace dividend, we know that really require cooperation and coherence. If we don't have this cooperation and coherence in practice, of course, we will be acting differently. I am from organization X, I am from country Y, I am from continent Z. We will be acting in different ways, and of course, our actions will be very massive, but they will not lead to the common goal which all of us want. And of course, again, he spoke about capacity building, training of the officers to some of the, how do you call it, issues like human rights and the rest of it. Of course, in terms of specificity, all of our actions need to be demand-driven. We are acting in an environment where the grassroots, the people themselves we seek to protect, the people themselves we seek to gain peace for, are very key to all of our initiatives and all of our interventions. So their demand is very key. Otherwise, we shall undertake some initiatives that will not even mean anything for the local population. I'll give you an example. In a given country, I visited a given country where we had a peace building initiative well undertaken, and I entered a village where the size of a university was built. A very massive building that could host 5 departments of a university. But that building was empty. So I asked myself, in terms of intervention, peace building intervention, did this project take into account demand-driven, I don't know, expectations? Was it demand-driven, this kind of project? If it were demand-driven, why is it that the building is standing empty with grass all over the face of it, and there is no student, there is no teacher? Did the community itself want this building? We ask ourselves a question that I will not answer. So every initiative that we put forth should also have a positive impact on the population. And saying positive impact on the population will mean responding to the very needs of these local people we want to how do you call it? We want to gain peace for. And going forward, going further to still share my own experience, we will have some key pillars, if I can say this way, that we may want to think about in terms of, I cannot say sequencing, but broadly thinking about how then which one comes first, which one comes next, and how do we go about it. For instance, all in all, we think of security. Before any initiative is is undertaken, of course, security is key. Like our sister said from the beginning, silencing the guns. I remember this was came out, even though I'm not speaking for the AU. If we don't keep the guns silent, of course, nothing can take place. You can have any brilliant idea, but the precondition for sustained peace will be the security itself. You secure the environment. Of course, this comes to the obligation of the national authorities. It's our collective effort because we need to support them in everything they do. So security comes first. When there is security, of course, you have the population that you are, I'm saying you to me, all of us, that we are obligated to, that we need to secure peace for. Once we do that, we then talk about the humanitarian assistance. We have our humanitarian organizations who then will come in with the help. So this should be a sort of integrated and consolidated measure that seek to safeguard and sustain life. You need to protect the local population. Yes, I was uprooted from my village and I'm into the next village. I don't have clothes, I don't have food, I don't have shelter. So how then do I live? Our colleagues from the humanitarian side will then come in to say, yes, this is what we can do. The medium term, the short to the medium term. Then we have the socio-economic reconstruction and development. The local population will not stay in the humanitarian phase forever. We will not continue to give them whatsoever, forever. We will start now to reflect on what was their livelihood, what were they into. Were they planters? Were they cashew nut harvester or growers? What were they into? Then we start to think about how then we can go about it. I remember in some societies, there are packages where communities are asked before the war, before the insurgency, what were you into? I was into rubber farming. I was into oil palm farming. I was into cashew nut farming. Then the seedings or the means to get the seedings for such will then be given to you, and you can go back to your community once these are done. But remember, all of this cannot be done at the current stage. I'm just sharing the experience that yes, once we are thinking about intervention, we should be able to plan along this line, because these actions have worked in certain societies, these actions have worked in certain countries, and this is how we have been able to, gain peace. Of course, after the socio-economic whatsoever, we have the political governance. Political governance will mean simply the presence of our authorities where they are supposed to be. Before the insurgency, our authorities were present in that given area, in that given space, in that given region. The authorities have to still be present in case they are not there at the given time. Then, of course, we know after every conflict situation, there should be accountability. Human rights will have to come in. Justice will have to speak. Of course, you cannot do justice, human rights, and the rest of it, and just say, yes, there's justice, people should come and give account of what they did. You have to reconcile the local population. So we should be thinking about not only justice, not only, human rights, but we should also think about reconciliation after everything is cleared in Cabo Delgado. This is what happens. And again, the interest of particular groups like women and children and vulnerable men. These are people who are most affected by war in any given society. When these things happen, what do we do to get them on their feet, to get them where they were before the war? So all of our initiative, we should be, we should be able to act in a way that yes, we can act with one voice. But as an individual on the field, some of the challenges we face, as an officer working in the field, some of the challenges we face, when I say these ideas, core principles, core what have you, some of the challenges we face, let me just share with you, so that maybe if you are facing the same, we can chart a way forward to say, when these things come about, how do we then go about it? The difficulties in sustaining national or local ownership is one of the challenges we are facing in the field that we can see. Once the local ownership is shown, and for instance, years or time goes by, we start to see the local population themselves who had this ownership when all the organizations, when all the actors were in place, they start now to dress back from the local ownership. We saw it was glaring when the actions were there, but later on, they just start to die. So there can be somewhat, challenges when we go to cross-check what we had done 2 years or 3 years before. So difficulties in sustaining national or local ownership can be one of the problems. The lack of capacity sometimes to manage expectations. The local population can be expecting so much of us, so much of the actors that you cannot believe. And sometimes the capacity can be less, whether financial or human resources or what have you, they can be less. And so we are looked at as though we are not acting to satisfy the local population. So lack of capacity can be one of the challenges. So we need to be designing strategies as to how we can respond to the needs of the how do you call it, of the local population. Then not too much interest in a strengthening partnership with CSOs. Sometimes it is difficult to partner with the CSOs. We know that they are the ones who are directly connected to the grassroots, but we don't partner with them. We have think tanks that do so much good analysis of most of the conflicts. However, we let them on the roadside and pass by them. But these are principles, these are policy documents that will guide us. These are reflections, these are analyses that will guide us. But we look at them and say, oh, these people, they don't know much about what is happening in the future, so let's forget. All of these things we say we should add together and we one voice. So we need to move along. Even the academic institutions and relevant peace builders at the local level, at the national level, at the regional level, at the continental level, and at the international level, we should all be able to work together. If we then should be able to how do you call it? If we want to gain peace together. One thing I will leave us with, I will go back again to understanding the rationale, the motive of the insurgency. I don't know much about Cabo Delgado, but we should ask ourselves, who are these people? What have they come for? And ask ourselves whether they are there to stay or whether they are just there to polish or what have you. Without understanding this, we will act, but yes, we will have some challenges that will be a little difficult to respond to. Let me stop here and allow the chance to other people, then we will come to other questions and answers.
Thank you very much, Honorable. Thank you very much. You nailed it. We need a granular understanding of who these people are. What have they come here for? Have they come to stay? Are they passing by? Are seeking logistics? What do they want? So you are absolutely right in saying that before we have a granular understanding about the nature of these people, our responses might look like we are writing in water. Thank you very much, Honorable. Thank you very much. Cabo Delgado, já está pronta? De Cabo Delgado. Marta Licuco.
Sim, boa tarde.
Muito boa tarde, como está?
Estou bem, graças a Deus, não sei se sou nada.
Está tudo bem, tudo bem. Por favor, nos diga, como é que vê a situação?
Sim, primeiro agradecer a esta oportunidade que me é dada para poder coordenar. E segundo dizer que o que está a acontecer em Cabo Delgado é mesmo preocupante. Com relação à assistência humanitária é uma questão preocupante, porque pronto, o que se verifica de fora e a maioria que está a ter essa ajuda humanitária são as pessoas nativas e em algum momento com um poder econômico estável, e isso nos preocupa bastante, porque há muitas famílias que ainda estão a sofrer com crianças. Nós sabemos que essas famílias maioritariamente são mulheres e é preocupante de fato. Esse é um outro aspecto. O outro aspecto com relação à intervenção militar. Sim, a intervenção militar é positiva. Em algum momento a situação permanece relativamente calma, mas imprevisível, como nós sabemos que ainda existem focos, e esses focos é que fazem com que, mesmo os agentes econômicos, falando do que disse o nosso representante da DIL, os do setor econômico setor privado não se desloca a esses locais porque não acham que há segurança. Mesmo a própria comunidade não vai porque acha que ainda não há segurança, por causa desses focos. Porque quando há esses focos, eu acho que não é possível a comunidade ir naqueles sítios, porque não, onde é que vai passar para ela? Ainda é um pouco, quer dizer, retrai o setor privado, assim como as próprias comunidades, para regressar a esses locais. Agora, com relação à manutenção da paz, de fato, também é uma questão que nós temos que discutir, porque implica outros aspectos envolvendo os civis, para compreender ações e programas de criação de um clima de confiança, para eliminar o sentimento de desconfiança no seio das comunidades. Então, alguma coisa deve ser feita para que essa confiança reine nas comunidades. E, por outro lado, a promoção dos direitos humanos, a igualdade de gênero, a democracia, a boa governação, isso também tem suas implicações. Enquanto isso não for uma realidade, a situação vai continuar difícil. E nós sabemos que para podermos ter própria edificação da paz, nós precisamos dessa questão dos direitos humanos, precisamos da questão da igualdade de gênero, precisamos que a democracia seja efetiva. Repito, seja efetiva a democracia. E, por outro lado, há a necessidade de capacitar as forças de segurança sobre os direitos humanos, para eles poderem conhecer e ter a observância do Estado de Direito nas suas intervenções. Pelo empoderamento das mulheres e jovens. Isso é essencial, porque se essa mulher, esses jovens, têm alguma capacidade econômica, formamos essas jovens mulheres, damos àqueles ofícios capacidades para poderem desenvolver as suas vidas, eu penso que também, por parte dos jovens, será difícil integrarem nessas fileiras que nós agora estão a nos preocupar. Então, essas são questões que em algum momento nos preocupam. E tendo em conta que quando há questão de conflito, o impacto na mulher e rapariga é maior, porque a partir dali, onde ela não tem acesso a serviços básicos, e nós sabemos que a parte reprodutiva da mulher é um serviço essencial que precisa investimento, precisa infraestruturas, e quando elas não existem, ela praticamente fica à deriva. E ela também é vulnerável na questão de abuso sexual, fome, falta de água. Há muita coisa envolvida com relação à mulher no contexto do conflito. São impactos que praticamente vão destruindo a vida da mulher. A mulher fica exposta. E nós sabemos que onde está a mulher, a criança também está lá. O que é que nós devemos fazer? Então, é necessário que hajam esforços para que essa situação melhore. E nós temos dito que, pronto, existe esse conflito, sim senhora, mas dizem que não tem rosto, mas eu acho que já é tempo de se procurar com quem se negociou na altura do resgate daquelas freiras, para se poder negociar desta paz, porque Cabo Delgado precisa de paz. Nós precisamos de paz. E isso é essencial. Então, haja esforços para que essa paz chegue a Cabo Delgado. Nós precisamos da paz. Não precisamos de discursos políticos, mas sim precisamos da paz para nós podermos continuar com a nossa vida. Digo nós, porque eu também estou aqui em Cabo Delgado. São mulheres que estão em risco e nós sabemos que quando há um conflito, mulheres e crianças são as maiores vítimas. Não é por acaso que 80% do país, aliás, dos conflitos, as mulheres é que são muitas deslocadas e refugiadas a nível do mundo. Então, é preciso que este conflito se encontre saídas para que nós possamos desenvolver. A participação da mulher nesses espaços de diálogo e tomada de decisão é essencial, porque ela também deve contribuir no desenvolvimento e tem capacidade para contribuir para o desenvolvimento deste país e da província em particular, e o seu envolvimento nestes processos é crucial. Sabemos que o conflito tem efeito devastador, e esses efeitos ferem a vida e a dignidade das mulheres e raparigas. Então, há necessidade, de fato, de chegar de uma outra maneira a esse aspecto do conflito, porque Cabo Delgado precisa de paz. Nós precisamos de paz. Os direitos humanos devem estar acima disso, devem ser observados, e esses direitos humanos devem ser para todos. E nós sabemos que a questão de gênero, igualdade de gênero é uma questão de direitos humanos. Então, a igualdade na participação, a igualdade das oportunidades sendo explorada dos jovens é essencial, porque são esses jovens que vão aderindo a esses movimentos. E nós precisamos de potenciar esses jovens para que eles possam olhar do outro lado e não olharem para o outro lado. A abertura dos espaços cívicos é importante, porque é nesses espaços cívicos onde nós podemos manifestar aqueles que são os nossos descontentamentos. E esse espaço cívico, a abertura não pode estar só na Constituição. Não. Nós temos que implementar. O Estado deve abrir os espaços cívicos para que nós possamos dizer de viva voz o que nós queremos. É verdade que está plasmado na Constituição o direito à manifestação, mas esse direito está vedado e deve ser aberto, porque nós, de Cabo Delgado, precisamos da paz, precisamos de marchar pela paz. Nós precisamos de marchar pela paz, porque essa paz que vai impulsionar o desenvolvimento de Cabo Delgado, é essa paz que vai melhorar a vida da população de Cabo Delgado, é essa paz que vai deixar as nossas instituições funcionais, e essa reconstrução de Cabo Delgado vai ser real, só pode ser real com a existência da paz em Cabo Delgado. Muito obrigada por enquanto.
Muito obrigado, Marta Licuco, por estas. Nós precisamos marchar pela paz. Precisamos de paz em Cabo Delgado. Precisamos de paz. E a liderança das mulheres é chave para ter. Precisamos de paz em Cabo Delgado. We have prominent panelists today. Prominent panelists. Professor Mohamed Saleh, Emeritus Professor Mohamed Saleh. You are the son of this continent. You have written a lot about all these things. You have reflected a lot. 3 weeks ago, you were in Lagos leading a high-level panel on violent extremism. We need your wisdom. The floor is yours, Professor. Conseguimos ouvir ele?
Do you hear me now? Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Diano Lubunga, is a friend for more than 2 decades. I'm always very happy to see you and talk to you, and also to talk in any organization you are supporting, also with your wisdom and knowledge. And of course, CDD, now at the helm of that place, I think this is the second time that, or the third time I speak. I always enjoy listening to your panelists and to the good ideas that they come with. And being probably the last or one before the last to speak, I doubt very much whether I'm going to add so much to their enlightening ideas and comments also, particularly the people who talk from very, very long experiences. I think we're here also to talk about insurgencies and quote unquote maybe peace building in post-insurgency situation, which I know we are not yet there, but maybe we are approaching that. So there are 2 things here, the insurgency and especially situations that are created by insurgencies on the ground, and how peace or peace building during what we might think is the beginning of the end of an insurgency is somehow probably different from post-conflict or post-war reconstruction in situations of civil wars of a secular dimension, or wars of independence, or liberation struggles, and all of that. And I think this also puts those who are in development and development practitioners in a very, very difficult situation. I think today we are to talk about the triple nexus. But let us don't forget that we have many triples before. We have relief, rehabilitation, and development. We have the 3Ds, that is development, diplomacy, and defense. I think then later on we have even the quadruple nexus: security, peace, development, and foreign policy. We have so many things, and most of them probably were not meant to respond to a post-insurgency situation. And probably this makes the efficacy of their uncritical implementation in cases such as Cabo Delgado is really requires very, very careful scrutiny, and I think, as my colleagues spoke, panelists spoke earlier, to see exactly what are the motives and how can we respond to these motives in a particular situation. I know there is a few things that I have not heard, and I wanted to mention a little bit about them. Are there positive de-radicalization programs like what we see in Uganda and in Kenya to a very large extent? Are there also, I have not heard much about alignment. Of course, we in the triple three or triple nexus, there is of course the obvious lack of coherence and coordination, as Alan Brandon has demonstrated. But alignment to me is the biggest problem. Alignment means that between what the development and rehabilitation or development, security and peace organizations are doing, and what is the development program of the country. Alignment means alignment with line ministries. So those who work on water will go to the ministry that deals with water, those are education, go to the Ministry of Education, those are on food, with the Ministry of Agriculture, and so on and so forth. So why am I saying that? I say this because what the insurgencies do often is to undermine the relationship between citizens and the state, and create a lack of trust. And by doing so, forces people to withdraw from the domain of the state, and that's the domain of development within the state, which of course gives the state legitimacy, and also gives citizens consent to what the state is planning to do. So the more the development activities are taken outside the domain of the state, the more the legitimacy of the state is challenged by the very population that the state is trying to help, but also challenged, of course, by the insurgents and others whom one can refer to them as spoilers, and who, as we are Professor Bonatti spoke, it is also create several issues related to the insurgents and their motives and what they are trying to do. So what am I saying? Just in a very simple language, in a situation as the one that we are talking about now, This is an extraordinary situation that requires an extraordinary intervention by the state. Not only in terms of security and all of that, I mean extraordinary to have special development strategy for the region. And that development strategy for the region is to be implemented by the line ministries of the state. Now, anybody else who has money that wanted to contribute to the rehabilitation and development and want to bring peace and security and everything else should work within that big program. Number one, in a coordinated issue, and there should be some coherence, but above all, there should also be alignment between all of those people who were working in this area. And that program, for that program to succeed, it requires accountability. Accountability, both accountability of the state, but the accountability of those who put themselves forward as development providers. The case of Ethiopia, of course, is the case in point. Ethiopia, when the war stopped in 1991 and they have the peace, what they did is very simple. They have within the relief and rehabilitation and they call it an economic reconstruction, they have a monitoring and evaluation department. That monitoring and evaluation department, you sign a contract with them. I want to dig 50 wells, construct 6 or 2 schools. I want to work on this road. I want to help the population to be able to improve agricultural production and marketing, and by giving this amount of inputs. Okay, when you finish your program, the evaluators of the government, I was one of these, they asked me, can you come and join us? I joined them 2 or 3 times. Okay, a simple, direct, forward evaluation. This is a contract that we signed with us. These are the things that we wanted to do together with the ministry, and we want to see. Because, why am I saying? I'm saying this simply because there are so many of those development aid or development or rehabilitation and relief pretenders who come to countries and stay for years and years and will not see any result for what they have done. Of course, you see them going up and down in their cars, but when you go down to the ground, there is no work. And this also sometimes makes one very cynical, because one would like to ask what country has graduated from underdevelopment or from post-war destruction or reconstruction by being dependent in an uncoordinated manner. I think much earlier, probably some panelists were not born in the first end of the first civil war in the Sudan, 1972. Sudanese government had the same program, aligning the development the development aid that is coming in different forms with the line ministries. Within 4 years, the development in South Sudan at that time, not now, reached the same pre-war level, and new developments began to show. So for me, I would like to go away from all of these externally conceived, externally planned, and externally implemented projects that are outside the domain of the state. Or even if they were within the domain of the state, the whole coordination, ends up in meetings. Because when you hear the meeting and civil society is invited to sit on the table, or the government also is part of the table, the government has its own program, is externally funded, not integrated and not aligned with the government ministries, line ministries. Of course, accountability becomes difficult for the government itself, and accountability also becomes even more difficult for the transnational partners that are working with the government. Now, and to me, that is also very, very important, because if you look at everything, just apart from Agenda 2063, everything else that we talk about, whether it is the triple nexus or quadruple nexus or 3Ds or whatever, it is very hard to use such a universalistic approach and try to apply it in a in a local situation or at a province or at a district level. Now, I know in the triple nexus, they always talk about civil society and also local government, but they pass very quickly through the state. Okay, well, I think that if take the case of Mozambique, and maybe some of you are old enough to comment on that, because what we know in Mozambique after the end of the war, all the development programs that came at that time were coordinated through the line ministries at all the levels of the country. And in fact, within 2 or 3 years, Mozambique was one of the some of the highest growth in Africa at that time, while many other countries, in fact, were suffering. We heard at that time about the 8% and the 9% and so on, but of course these figures began to come down as the time goes on. But there was an experience in Mozambique, a very well coordinated effort. Those who come from outside are not prevented, but asked to integrate their work with the line ministries and work. I hear Brandon say that they are working with the Minister of Justice. I think that's a very good example, but also we wanted the other guys who were not just to get the permission of the government and to get the contracts, to also work in a very coordinated manner so that the fruits of the development will be very clear and will be seen. That experiences, there are so many experiences in the African countries. There are good experiences in Mozambique in its post-war reconstruction, which they should be proud of. I think maybe we should also look at some of these experiences, because as far as I know, that strategy was to a very large extent coordinated by Mozambique and by Mozambicans. I mean, are Mozambicans like that no longer exist or what? I mean, you have to see how you can look at that and try to emulate and try to improve. Of course, the context has changed. The context has changed. We know that. The global context has changed. Many things have changed. There is no money. There is money, but not as in the past. And I know when people tell you about the triple nexus, and I know that the colleague from Oxfam talked about the resources are dwindling and shrinking and all of that. Because if the resources are dwindling, you want to do so much with too little, and therefore the best thing to do is to collapse the rationalized sectors. So to put this, because all the tensions that Brandon talked about, all the tensions that you see between the domain of security and human rights, and sometimes between the domain of security and development, and if security makes the priority, of course, most of the money goes to security and development, and democracy are left behind, and so on and so forth. And I think because of these type of difficulties, it is very, very important not to take such approaches, nexuses and all that as their face value, but to take them very critically and apply them to the local situation of your country. Don't listen to that local ownership and local government ownership and this ownership that happens through coordinated meetings really will not take too much. You have to have control because there is a power asymmetry. I mean, the guys who have even if they are sitting with you in the table, in terms of power asymmetry, those who provide the money have much bigger voice than you. Tell you go tomorrow. Then you start asking yourself, what am I going to do? So my approach is very simple: better coordination, integration, and alignment of all of these efforts. Align them with the line ministries so that you can see results happening by designating this area as a special area that requires special, not a special development program, no, special strategy within the state itself. That the state to put its money where its mouth is. When the state puts its money, of course the state has money for this province. I mean, you don't get their part of the national budget. Where does this national budget go? So there is money people can build on. And build also, this is also one way that you can build institutions that have been destroyed by the conflict. You cannot build these institutions if they do not have enough resources. So if people have resources, instead of using bringing 30 or 40 people running around with cars and vehicles and everything else and getting so much salary, okay, make it slim. Just bring one person to sit in that. If you are if there is no trust, bring these people to look at how your money has been spent. Bring experts to help people in water engineering, digging wells, bring doctors, bring everybody to work with these people in their hospitals to raise their capacity instead of having separate programs for capacity development and workshops. I tell you, this workshop, there are some people who became experts of this workshop. They have gone to more than 30 or 40. Some people go only for the period. So why not be in service training after this period so that also empower and strengthen the capacity of the state institutions through this? So let me finish here. Very simple. Alignment through the line ministries. And anybody who has money comes through them. Have your representatives sitting on the table. Let people have not a program, special national strategy, because this is a province really facing extraordinary challenges, and these extraordinary challenges are derailing the development of the whole country. If the country wants to solve this problem, put money in this place for the next 5 years, renewable for another 5 years, 10 years, all of us as Mozambicans to be able to enjoy the resources that are in this area and in the neighboring areas and the neighboring province and the next province, and to link ourselves with the other countries that we can also have trans-African trade or God knows what. Please give it special, even a special constitutional position to develop it to be in a place where it can look after itself, but also look after Mozambique, because it has enough resources to look after itself and to look also after a big chunk of the Mozambican budget. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much. The need for designing national programs, the need for alignment with key ministries, but also the need for local capacities and resources to be used. As we move towards the end of our discussion today, I will get back to you, Professor, but not now. I'll get back to you to respond to these questions. Before I do that, I wanted to revert to Professor Mohammed Salih, to Professor Liazat Bonat, to Honorable Ernest Dolo, and also to Alan Bryden. And I give 2 minutes and a half for each of you, and my question to each of you is the following. Based on what you heard, based on what you have said, do you see a risk of conflict intractability? Perhaps starting with Professor Mohammed Salih, what it is, what would be a conflict intractability? Is there a risk of conflict intractability? Time is short, 3 minutes. I know that in 1 minute you hammer this this question. Professor, start with you.
Starting with me?
Yes, with you, Professor.
Okay. Now, I think the risk of conflict intractability is real, because the conflict is not only in Mozambique. This is a transnational conflict whereby the insurgencies get support from as far as the Democratic Republic of the Congo. As you know, Mozambique belongs to ISIS province there. In addition, of course, as you know, the Somali province of ISIS, it is the coordinator of training, the coordinator of logistics, and the coordinator also of the sleeping cells and all of that. So it is real because it is not only, and therefore it requires much more cooperation with the neighboring countries, and the possibility of these insurgencies move to other ungovernable spaces that are neighboring Mozambique, and I know the country I am talking about, is very, very real. In addition, just 1 minute, there are four mega trends in terrorism today. Number one, decentralization, proliferation, and their increasing localization by having affiliates within the countries. Number two, the use of cryptocurrency, meaning that they no longer need the banks, they have their ways to be able to bring any amount of money to finance people in that country. Number three, we see that there is an increasing possibility of using drones. Last year, 750 drones were used by terrorists in Africa, both in West Africa and in East Africa. This will not only make it intractable, it makes it much very difficult for the security, unless they are very well trained and into new technologies to be. And the fourth one is that terrorists are increasingly tapping into new technologies, and they are training themselves. There are several states in cyber terrorism. There are several stages ahead of our own state cyber terrorism. Why? Because digital jihad does not need training spaces, does not need people to be in anywhere else. These people digitally, they are preferred, they are decentralized, they have the possibility. These four trends make it intractable if our governments are not capable and clear-minded in responding to terrorism. I'm sorry I took more than the time you have given me.
Honorable Ernest Dolo.
Yes, it's 1 minute, so maybe I'll take a few seconds.
Yes.
There is the possibility of conflict intractability.
Yes.
Based on the sense of the propaganda of the terrorists, if I can say it this way. There is one word that resonates: Shabab. If you go to Somalia, you will hear that word. If you come to Cabo Delgado, I remember reading some notes. I heard the word, in fact, I read the word Shabab. This is a sales of the propaganda within the very core of the society that is the youth. I don't speak the language, but I think Shabab means youth. The fact of telling the youth this is for you, it means they shall grow with it, and they shall sell it, they shall promote it. So based on this set of ideology, we can feel that yes, there is a possibility, possibility, there is not, but there is a possibility of conflict intractability, because it is the very core of the society, that is the youth that is being sold the ideology. Thank you.
Honorable turn to you, Professor Liazati Bonatti.
Sim, eu queria concordar sobretudo, com posições do professor Salles e também do Honorable Ernest Nyado. É exatamente isso, a probabilidade de interactibilidade do conflito, mas também eu fiquei um pouco alarmado com a posição do professor Massatini, que representa a TIN, e que nós, quando estamos a falar de jihadismo transnacional, não estamos a falar de comunidade muçulmana ou muçulmanos no geral, nós estamos a falar de uma linha de pensamento, de uma ideologia e de uma política muito particular. Por isso nós temos que dar muita atenção a essas dimensões em Moçambique e, sobretudo, claro, em Cabo Delgado, mas também em outras regiões, né? Porque nós identificamos eles como seguidores da ISIS ou do Estado Islâmico, é porque eles levantam aquela bandeira da organização no segundo juramento para o novo califa do Estado Islâmico, é a segunda vez, porque tem que fazer cada vez quando muda a califa, o juramento é pessoal, né? Eles fazem. Então, é muito sério e é muito direta essa ligação neste momento, talvez não começou assim, mas neste momento estamos nessa situação, então temos que tomar mais atenção a esse aspecto, temos que desengajar aquelas pessoas que ainda conseguimos desengajar, os jovens, pessoas que estão lá por outras razões, né? E confrontar a ideologia que é muito forte. Nós temos que conhecer essa ideologia e contrapor os pontos que inviabilizam, pelo menos legitimizam. E temos que saber que, de facto, a internet é muito poderoso, né? Temos que lidar com a internet, com essas mensagens em várias línguas, porque mensagens vêm até em Indonésia, em Tagalog, para Moçambique, nós vimos da outra vez, né? Eles vêm árabe, eles vêm swahili, e muitas outras línguas onde temos muçulmanos, porque esse movimento é transnacional, mas é um movimento violento, político, muito particular, não cabe a todos os muçulmanos, e nós não estamos a identificar todos os muçulmanos, mas temos que saber que existe esse movimento e existe essa ideologia, temos que lidar com consequências da sua presença, temos que fazer a radicalização, temos que criar centros de treinamento para a vida pacífica, temos que criar oportunidades e esperanças para os jovens, para que eles possam fazer planos para seu futuro. E temos que ter muitos programas e projetos que são fisicamente visíveis, não só em termos de fala, mas em termos de construções, criação de centros, em termos de criação de...
Alan Bryden? Alan, your final thoughts?
Final thoughts. I won't speak to the risk of conflict intractability in a military sense of the word. I think that's not where I come from, but I think since everyone agrees that the causes and the issues at play are much broader, they're about human rights, they're about economic exclusion, social issues, weak governance. There, I would say the risks are there because one of the definitions of madness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And by that, I mean if you neglect the fundamental need to build trust and relationships between the state and citizens, to apply a rights-based approach, then you're not going to address those underpinning challenges. Put more positively, I actually do think that opportunities do exist because of the blended interests of different stakeholder groups, of national and regional authorities, for different reasons, of civil society, of economic actors and others, to ensure a more stable environment for development, that you can move forward in these areas. It needs to be a national process. That I couldn't agree more. The international partners can do an awful lot better in supporting such a national process, but also those ministries, that national process, it needs to be accountable, it needs to be transparent, and we need to see the political will and the resources to do it. So those are my last remarks, and thank you again to all.
Thank you very much, Alan, for those remarks. Professor João Machatin, you are with me here. You listened to all considerations. I would invite you now for 5 minutes to tell us a bit more of how ADIN is steering the different networks in Cabo Delgado towards one direction, number one. Number two, how that how that process can lead to a situation where we do not end up which is not desirable. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, Prof. I will not delve very much deep into so many things because the question is so complex. Perhaps I should catch some of the points that were highlighted by different speakers in their final thoughts, including during their presentations. And I understand that this discussion is within the framework of the PREDIN, which is the government-approved program for resilience and development in the north of Mozambique. I would quite agree, I think it was Professor Salim, who indicated clearly that we can define all the conflict, we can have so. What then? What is it that need to be done? How do we do that? Who should be involved, or must be involved, or is currently involved? And also, the professor there indicated it is critically important to closely coordinate with the line government institutions, the executive institutions, because otherwise we will be sailing in different directions. To that end, my experience on the ground with ADIN and now with approval of PREDIN is that it is important to align not only in terms of discussions or in terms of discourse. It is important to align the actual projects that are designed on the ground. Because some of the things, statements in the newspaper, statement in the meeting in Maputo. Now, when you go to the ground and you want to actually implement on the ground, what you see is those officials, because everything is about people. A person is the one who thinks, a person is the one who takes action and so on. What you see on the ground is that when people leave the capital cities and they go to Cabo Delgado or to districts, each person has different interpretations of how to coordinate with executive, with the government. That is one. The second thing is that it is important to narrow down the issue of information asymmetry. You go to Cabo Delgado, the document that is elaborated here, down there in Maputo, is so complex. Do we have the same level of interpretation of this document? Can we all reduce this document to doable actions? Do we have all that capacity? And it boils down again to what the Oxfam representative said. There's a need for continuous capacity building. Now, within the framework of PREDIN, we know that PREDIN has got 3 main pillars. And this appeal from Professor to align, to coordinate with the line ministries, it's critically important for us to know. Under Pillar 1, for example, who should be there? You know, national leadership, that's a Pillar 1. How are we going to coordinate there in Cabo Delgado for us to implement this national leadership? 2, the issue of inclusion. And 3, this collaboration and dovetailing with other similar strategies, and so on. So what I see here and the added value of this discussion is that we seem to converge that there is importance for us to coordinate, be it at the national level and local level. That's number one. Number two, there's a need for capacity building. That is true because there is a glaring information asymmetry, technical information, and admin information. And number three, it is important for us transparency. Civil society organization, domestic and international, we should have the same level of transparency. And the fourth, the issue of human rights in the context of these terrorist actions, insurgents in Cabo Delgado is critically important. The lady who is based in Cabo Delgado will say, we need peace. If we all together move in the same direction, that we need to work towards peace, and we have the same interpreter, how do we achieve this desire? If we are together in the same interpretation, we are working on the same direction, I'm sure we will not eliminate totally the conflict, because it can't eliminate it, but we'll mitigate it. Now, from the ground, is there a risk of intractability of conflict that is happening in the Cabo Delgado? The answer is yes. Why? Why? Because it is multidimensional. It involves a different multitude of actors, and the causes are multiple. And therefore, that's why we were saying it is important for ADIN to work closely with a different segment of the civil society to help narrow down the definition of the causes of this conflict. Is it really a conflict? Is it a war? Okay, they say it's asymmetrical warfare. Asymmetrical of what dimension? So I didn't need to work closely with civil society organizations of different segments for us to be able to define what causes this. And all these many causes, which is the strategic one without which others they cannot come up. So we need to define these things. That is one. The other thing as well is, as we go to the ground to implement, I have seen so many studies, so many interventions, so many webinars and so on. I only see definitions. I only see interpretations. Can you please help us? Can you please help us say, okay, on the humanitarian side, we suggest you do A, B, C. On the social cohesion, we suggest you do A, B, C. I take an example here that I shared with the Professor Novunga. I said we want to promote a sports league in the north. The objective, to promote social cohesion. But when you take this one to some of the organizations, be it local or international, they'll say that one is a periphery. So this, I think when we are working together, and someone was saying, we need meaningful participation of the civil society. I quite agree, yes. Because it's not enough to send an invitation to Professor Novunga. Okay, we are having a meeting tomorrow. Can you come? And yet they are not informed what is the agenda. What is that they should bring to the table? I think I quite agree on that one. And being there on the ground, I can only say thank you very much for giving so much food for thought. And we have gained a lot of things that we have to think as we plan things. And the last thing is for international development community. 47 years of development aid in Mozambique, we are still on the same thing. 27 years, 28 years of post-conflict Mozambique development aid, we are still on the same space. What is wrong? Are we doing the right thing? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor João Machatin. This has been a fruitful discussion today. Fruitful discussion today. I suggest that we end it here today. Before that, I wanted to say that over the past 2 years, CDD has been catalyzing a platform for dialogue for conflict resolution in Cabo Delgado. We have been advocating for dialogue for conflict resolution. We have a report. I will share the report with those who don't have it. As we, from the root causes of the conflict that have been outlined very well by Professor Liazat Bonat, and the remarks made by Marta Likuku, our human rights defender from Cabo Delgado, Professor João Machatin, and also the comments made by Emeritus Professor Mohamed Salih and Honorable Ernest Dolo. We believe that dialogue, it can lead us into preventing conflict intractability. This is an area where we should all work collaboratively through the tribal nexus, precisely not to be there. So we would end it today. We promise one thing, that we continue this discussion with you. We are working with Professor Mohamed Salih. We started a collaboration with Honorable Ernest Dolo, working with Dr. Alan Bryden through our partnership with DCAF. We implement the voluntary principle, security and human rights, and also with Professor Liazat Bonat, who is on her way back to Mozambique after working in Trinidad and Tobago. So what I can say is that we have to continue this discussion, Professor. Yes, in order to deepen our understanding of what is happening, but at the very same time, and given the acknowledgement that we need to make sure that the youth, they see that there are alternatives, and dialogue also centric to youth, centric groups and interests, it would lead us to preventing conflict intractability. I want to thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let us continue. We will be going to Cabo Delgado to have an in-person workshop on this and other initiatives. Some of you will be there with us. We have to go to Cabo Delgado, be with Professor João Machatin in person there in the ground, also give an encouragement, but also being there to see what is happening and engage in dialogue with local authorities, because they're out there facing the challenges of dealing with IDPs that are going through difficult situations. So we have to be there. And I invite you all to make time, join us in the activities there, and help deepen the understanding and push for dialogue so that we can have a situation where the conflict does not become intractable. Thank you very much to all of you, all those who followed this discussion from Zoom and from the other CDD platforms. I thank my team today that has done a wonderful job making sure that we have good communication, speaking from different parts of the globe. Thank you very much. We'll leave it today, and we will continue in 2 weeks from today with the same issue, with different players, but all aimed at preventing conflict intractability and ending the conflict as well. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.